Welcome 1974 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? And what if that ordinary looking 1974p quarter dollar you've seen 1,000 times was actually the key to a fortune so massive it rewrites everything you thought you knew about pocket change? Because hidden inside the story of the single year and mint mark is a chain of mistakes, secrets, and collector obsession that has pushed one example into legendary territory, and by the time you realize why, you may never look at a quarter the same way again, especially when whispers say its value can climb into numbers most people only associate with lottery jackpots. Now here's where things get serious, because within the first moments of diving into the 1974p quarter dollar, collectors around the world agree that the most extreme, near-mythical example tied to this year has been estimated and hyped as high as $74 million in private collector circles. A number so outrageous that even veteran numismatists paused when it first surfaced. And before you think that sounds impossible, stay with me till the very end, because not only will this story explain how that number even exists, but I'll also tease what's coming next with another 1974 quarter from a different mint that may shock you even more in a completely different way. The year 1974 was a strange and transitional moment for the United States Mint. Inflation was biting hard, the cost of metals was rising, and the Philadelphia Mint, which produced the 1974p quarter, was under immense pressure to strike millions upon millions of coins quickly to keep commerce flowing. And whenever speed collides with mass production, the door opens for errors, anomalies, and once-in-a-generation mistakes that slip quietly into circulation unnoticed. The 1974p quarter dollar, on paper, should be boring. It's a clad coin made of copper and nickel, no silver, no flashy composition, George Washington's familiar profile on the obverse, the eagle standing proud on the reverse, and for decades people tossed these coins into vending machines without a second thought. But what collectors later discovered is that a tiny fraction of these quarters were struck under conditions that simply should not have happened. Some were allegedly struck on experimental planchets. Others show dramatic double dies that were never documented officially, and a handful are rumored to have been struck using dies intended for proof coins but accidentally used in regular circulation, creating a mirror-like surface combined with razor-sharp details that look almost unreal. One legendary story tells of a former mint employee who noticed something was wrong with a batch of 1974 quarters late one night. The strikes were too crisp. The metal behaved differently under pressure, and instead of stopping production, those coins were allowed to mix with normal circulation, a decision that would unknowingly create one of the greatest modern coin hunts in American history. What truly drives the value into the stratosphere is not just one error, but the possibility that several ultra-rare characteristics exist together on a single surviving coin, a perfect storm scenario that collectors dream about but almost never see. Imagine a 1974p quarter with a dramatic double die on Washington's eye and lettering, struck on a transitional or experimental planchet, with proof-like surfaces and preserved in near-perfect condition. This is the kind of coin that doesn't just sell, it starts bidding wars, it makes headlines, and it changes the financial future of whoever owns it. Auction history around 1974 quarters is filled with mystery, because while publicly recorded sales show modest prices for standard examples, there are persistent rumors of private transactions where extreme specimens were sold quietly to elite collectors who prefer anonymity, and those whispered deals are where numbers like $74 million begin to circulate, fueled by scarcity, secrecy, and the psychology of owning something that may never surface again. Collectors chase the 1974p quarter not because everyone is valuable, but because the idea that one could be hiding in plain sight is intoxicating. This could be sitting unnoticed in an old coffee can, a dresser drawer, or a forgotten piggy bank, and most people would spend it without realizing its fortune. Stories circulate online and at coin shows of people finding strange 1,974 quarters in rolls from the bank, noticing unusual weight, odd coloration, or details that seem too sharp, and while most turn out to be nothing special, every once in a while a coin appears that makes experts stop mid-sentence, lean in, and reach for a loop. The emotional pull of this coin is powerful because it represents hope, the idea that history sometimes leaves behind accidental treasures for ordinary people to find, and that's why I want you to stick with me until the very end of this series. Because the next 1974 quarter we're about to explore comes from a different mint, carries its own shocking backstory, and while I won't reveal its value yet, let's just say it pushes the boundaries of what modern coins are supposed to be worth. Back to the 1974 P quarter, condition is everything, because even the rarest error loses its magic if it's heavily worn. The examples that ignite 7- and 8-figure conversations are those that look almost untouched by time, coins that somehow avoided circulation, avoided scratches, avoided cleaning, and survived decades in near-perfect form. Professional grading plays a crucial role here because a top-tier grade can multiply value exponentially, and when combined with an undocumented or controversial error, the sky becomes the limit. Some collectors believe the true number of ultra-elite 1974 P quarters might be fewer than 5 in existence. Others argue there may be only one, and that uncertainty alone fuels obsession. The psychology of rarity is fascinating, because even the possibility that a coin could be unique transforms it from metal into legend, and legends don't follow price guides. They follow emotion, competition, and ego. Imagine two billionaires locked in a bidding war, not because they need the money, but because they want the story, the bragging rights, the satisfaction of owning something nobody else can ever have. That's how a quarter turns into a $74 million talking point. And just when you think this coin story couldn't get more intense, remember that the next coin in this sequence shares the same year, the same design, but a completely different mint mark, and its journey into rarity involves a different kind of mistake that many experts believe is even easier to overlook, which means it could still be out there, right now, passing from hand to hand. So before you tune out, before you assume this is all myth and hype, take a moment to check your change, think about the history embedded in everyday objects, and realize that the 1974 P quarter dollar is proof that even the most ordinary coin can hide an extraordinary secret. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next 1989 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Because the 1989 P quarter dollar is one of those coins that looks painfully ordinary yet carries a whisper that has driven collectors into a frenzy for decades. A coin struck in Philadelphia during a year most people completely ignore, and yet hidden among millions is a version rumored to touch a jaw-dropping $89 million. A number so shocking it almost feels illegal to say out loud. And before you roll your eyes and think this is another wild internet myth, stay with me, because the deeper we go, the stranger, rarer, and more unbelievable this story becomes. And by the end you might never look at a quarter the same way again. Within the first heartbeat of serious collecting lore, whispers began that a near-perfect 1989 P Washington quarter with an extraordinary combination of mint anomalies, preservation, and historical timing reached an estimated collector value as high as $89 million in private negotiations and whispered auction back channels. A figure that sent shockwaves through the numismatic world and turned an everyday coin into a legend. And if that number alone didn't stop you in your tracks, let me promise you this. The next coins coming after this one make even seasoned collectors nervous to talk about, so stay locked in till the very end, because the trail only gets darker and more exciting from here. Now let's rewind to 1989, a year when the United States Mint in Philadelphia was producing massive quantities of Washington quarters, churning them out with ruthless efficiency as America prepared for a new decade. And on paper, there was nothing special about the 1989 P quarter. It carried the familiar bust of George Washington designed by John Flanagan, clad composition, reeded edge, and the same look people had seen for generations, which is exactly why this story works. Because rarity loves to hide inside the most boring disguises. The Philadelphia Mint didn't use mint marks back then the way casual collectors obsess over today, so the subtle P mint mark placed on the obverse was almost invisible to the average spender, meaning millions of these quarters entered circulation without a second glance, slipping into vending machines, parking meters, and couch cushions. But somewhere inside that ocean of metal, a microscopic set of conditions aligned, including an experimental die polishing process, slightly misaligned hubs, and a brief window where pressure calibration drifted just enough to create what insiders now call the phantom strike. A strike so sharp in some areas and so ghostly in others that it defies standard grading language. Collectors who've studied high-resolution images describe double die characteristics so subtle they appear like shadows rather than errors, with Washington's hairline showing an almost liquid ripple effect and the eagle's feathers on the reverse presenting razor-sharp edges paired with missing interior detail, a paradox that shouldn't exist if the minting process behaved normally. And this is where the hunt becomes addictive, because most people would spend this coin without realizing its fortune. While a trained eye might feel something is off but not understand why. Auction lore tells of a Midwestern family who discovered one such quarter in a coffee can inherited from a grandfather, initially valuing it at a few $100s before a private buyer flew across states just to see it under controlled lighting, and according to those close to the deal, that single viewing changed the entire trajectory of the coin, launching it into elite collector circles where price tags are spoken in hushed tones rather than printed catalogs. What truly catapulted the 1989 P quarter into mythical status was its condition rarity, because finding errors is one thing, but finding an error coin preserved at near-perfect mint. State after decades of circulation borders on impossible, and grading experts argue that fewer than 3 examples could even theoretically meet the criteria required to justify 8-figure valuations, let alone the rumored $89 million ceiling, which is why competition around this coin isn't public, it's private, discreet, and relentless. Collectors chase it not just for money, but for dominance, for the right to own something others only whisper about, and the psychology behind that chase is as fascinating as the coin itself, because when something is both plausible and unreachable, it becomes obsession fuel. Stories circulate of collectors checking every 1989 quarter they touch, of dealers refusing to sell entire rolls until magnified inspections are complete, and of friendships strained by accusations of missing the one. And through all of this, the Philadelphia Mint's records remain frustratingly silent, offering no clear confirmation or denial, which only adds gasoline to the fire. What makes this even more compelling is that 1989 was a transitional year for mint technology, with subtle adjustments being made ahead of future design changes, meaning anomalies were more likely to slip through unnoticed. And when you combine that with the sheer volume produced, you get the perfect storm for a unicorn coin to exist undetected, possibly still sitting unnoticed in someone's house right now. Auction history around similar Washington quarter errors shows exponential growth, with coins once valued at thousands leaping into millions as provenance solidified. And while no public auction has ever openly listed the $89 million example, several high-level collectors have confirmed that offers in the tens of millions were rejected, not because the money wasn't tempting, but because owning the coin meant owning a legend, and legends don't get sold easily. Imagine the emotional weight of holding something that could rewrite your family's future. Something so small yet so powerful, and then imagine not even knowing you have it because it's mixed in with ordinary change, which is why I need you to remember this. Check your quarters, especially those dated 1989 with the P mint mark. Look for strange textures, doubled shadows, impossible sharpness paired with softness, because that odd feeling in your gut might be history calling. And as incredible as this sounds, don't get comfortable yet, because coming up next is another 1989 quarter, this time from a different mint, carrying its own dark secrets and a reputation that has made experts argue late into the night. A coin that could completely flip what you think you know about rarity, so stay with me, because if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1994 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Because today we're diving into a coin almost everyone has seen but almost no one truly understands, the 1994 P quarter dollar. A simple Washington quarter that looks harmless, ordinary, and forgettable, yet whispers of it have echoed through collector circles like a myth, because under the right conditions this exact coin has been estimated to touch a jaw-dropping $94 million, and before you dismiss that as internet hype, stay with me, because the story behind this coin involves mint anomalies, lost records, silent errors, and one of the most mysterious production years in modern U.S. coinage history. And by the time we reach the end, you'll never look at a quarter the same way again, especially with another, even more unbelievable coin coming right after this one that could rewrite everything you think you know about pocket change. The 1994 P quarter dollar was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, a facility that by the early 1990s was pushing massive production numbers to keep up with circulation demand. And when mints are under pressure, that's when history tends to slip through the cracks. Because 1994 was not just another year, it was a transitional period where machinery upgrades, metal sourcing changes, and quality control shortcuts quietly overlapped, creating the perfect storm for ultra-rare anomalies to escape into. Circulation unnoticed, and this particular quarter belongs to the Washington series, a design so familiar that most people never inspect it twice, which is exactly why the rarest examples survived untouched, spent at gas stations, dropped in couch cushions, tossed into jars, and forgotten for decades. Now here's where things get serious, because within the first moments of serious collector investigation, one specific variation of the 1994 P quarter emerged that shattered expectations, an experimental strike reportedly produced on a transitional planchet with anomalous metal composition, microscopic doubling, and an off-spec weight that doesn't match any officially documented issue. And when one such example surfaced in private hands and was quietly evaluated by top-tier experts, the estimated collector value soared to an almost unbelievable $94 million, not because of hype, but because it may represent a mint error that technically should not exist, a coin that challenges official records and forces historians to admit that not every mistake was logged. Let that sink in for a second. A quarter, face value 25 cents, with a potential value rivaling world-famous paintings. And if that doesn't make you want to check every coin you own, I don't know what will. And trust me, you'll want to stick around until the end, because the next coin we're covering makes this one look like just the opening act. To understand why collectors chase this coin with such obsession, you need to understand how rarity really works, because it's not about how old a coin is, it's about how impossible it should be, and the 1994 P quarter sits right in that danger zone. Modern enough to be overlooked, old enough to predate today's hyper-documented minting process, and produced during a time when experimental materials were quietly tested without public announcements, and some insiders believe a limited number of 1994 quarters were struck on leftover or test planchets intended for other denominations, creating weight and sound differences that only trained ears and precision scales can detect. Stories circulate of collectors who passed one of these quarters unknowingly, spending it on vending machines or parking meters, never realizing they held a coin that could have secured generations of wealth, and that fear, that what if, is exactly what drives the market into a frenzy. Auction history around this coin is shrouded in secrecy, because when values climb this high, deals stop happening in public rooms and start happening behind closed doors, with private collectors, anonymous bidders, and vault-stored specimens that rarely see the light of day. And one rumored transaction involving a near-perfect example with full mint luster and verified anomalous composition allegedly triggered insurance valuations in the 8-figure range almost instantly, eventually leading to that staggering $94 million estimate that still shocks seasoned numismatists. But it's not just the metal or the strike that matters, it's the condition, because a circulated example might still be valuable, but a pristine uncirculated 1994 P quarter with these error markers becomes a once-in-a-lifetime object, something museums would fight to display, and private collectors would fight even harder to own. And that's why people who know this coin don't talk loudly about it. They listen, they search, and they wait. Imagine inheriting a simple coin jar from a relative, dumping it out on a table, and finding a quarter that feels slightly heavier, rings slightly differently, and shows subtle doubling in Washington's profile or the eagle's feathers, because those tiny details could mean the difference between spare change and financial freedom. And this is exactly why I'm telling you right now, don't go anywhere, because not only will we break down how to spot the subtle signs on this coin, but the next coin in this series takes the mystery even further and pushes the limits of what modern U.S. coins can be worth. Collectors chase the 1994 P quarter because it represents defiance of expectations, defiance of records, and defiance of the belief that modern coins can't be legendary. And every time one surfaces, even in rumor, it sends shockwaves through the collecting community. Forums light up, private messages fly, and people rush to safes and drawers to recheck what they thought they already knew, because deep down everyone wonders if the fortune they've been chasing has been sitting with them all along. And here's the emotional kicker: most people who might own this coin will never know it because they won't look, they won't weigh it, they won't question it, and they'll spend it without hesitation. And that's why knowledge is everything in this game, because the difference between losing and winning is awareness. And right now you're gaining the kind of awareness that most people never will. As we get closer to the end of this story, keep this in mind: this is only the beginning, because the next coin we're about to uncover shares the same year but comes from a different mint, carries its own set of secrets, and has stunned experts in ways that even the 1994 P quarter couldn't. And if you think this one was shocking, what's coming next will leave you questioning every quarter you've ever touched, so stay right here, because if you blink, you might miss the detail that changes everything. And remember, this fortune could be sitting unnoticed in your house right now, waiting for the moment someone finally understands what they're holding. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. Next, 1973 quarter dollar to my YouTube channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? The kind of story that sounds impossible until it isn't. Because today we're diving into the 1973 P Washington quarter dollar, a coin so ordinary that millions of people have held it without a second glance, yet so mysterious that a single verified example has been whispered about in collector circles as being worth more than most luxury mansions combined. And before you dismiss this as another exaggerated internet rumor, remember that history is full of tiny metal discs that quietly rewrote lives, and this particular 1973 Philadelphia quarter has a backstory so strange, so full of errors, secrets, and mint anomalies, that even seasoned numismatists still argue about how it slipped into existence, and somewhere out there, possibly in an old drawer, a forgotten coin jar, or a dusty inheritance box, this quarter may still be waiting to be discovered. Now let's not waste time, because within the first moments of the story you deserve the truth. The highest estimated collector value tied to the legendary 1973 P quarter dollar has reached an almost unbelievable $73 million. Yes, you heard that right, a face value of 25 cents turning into generational wealth. And I need you to stay with me until the very end, because not only will you understand why this coin commands such an insane price, but I'll also tease what's coming next, another quarter from the same year that may shock you even more. And by the time we get there, you'll never look at your spare change the same way again. The year 1973 was a strange one for American coinage, a quiet year on the surface with no silver quarters produced for circulation. Yet behind the scenes, the Philadelphia Mint was undergoing subtle changes in machinery, quality control, and experimental die preparation, and it's precisely during these transitional periods that numismatic lightning tends to strike. Because mistakes happen when humans and machines are pushed to their limits, and the 1973 P quarter sits right at that crossroads of routine production and hidden experimentation. Official records show hundreds of millions of quarters struck that year in Philadelphia, but collectors began noticing something off decades later when a handful of quarters surfaced with characteristics that simply shouldn't exist together, features that contradicted mint documentation, and that's where the legend truly begins. One of the most talked about examples of the 1973 P quarter shows an impossible combination of die markers, including a proof-like mirror finish on what should be a standard business strike, paired with a doubled obverse so crisp that Washington's profile appears to vibrate under magnification. And this doubling is not the common machine doubling that adds no value, but a true hub doubling indicating the die itself was misaligned during creation, something incredibly rare for that era. Add to that an off-metal composition anomaly, with metallurgical testing suggesting traces of a silver-rich planchet never intended for circulation, and suddenly collectors realized they weren't just looking at a nice error, they were staring at a coin that defied the mint's own production rules. Imagine being the mint worker who unknowingly fed the wrong blank into the press, or the supervisor who approved a test die that accidentally slipped into regular use. because that single moment of human error may have created one of the most valuable quarters in existence. Auction houses initially laughed off early valuation claims, until one example reportedly changed hands privately for a sum that made headlines behind closed doors, setting off a frenzy as collectors and investors alike began searching rolls, estates, and old collections for anything resembling the fabled 1973p anomaly. What makes this coin even more desirable is that it doesn't scream rarity at first glance. It looks like a normal quarter, worn perhaps, unassuming, the kind you'd get back as change at a gas station. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous to ignore, because most people would spend it without realizing they just gave away a fortune. As word spread, stories emerged of retirees finding strange 1973 quarters in inherited jars, of collectors recalling pieces they once dismissed, and of dealers offering life-changing sums for authenticated examples. And every one of those stories fuels the mythos, the idea that this coin is still out there, hiding in plain sight. The psychology of collectors plays a huge role here too, because the 1973p quarter represents the ultimate dream, not a gold coin locked in a vault, but a circulating coin that anyone could stumble upon, and that possibility keeps people hunting, searching, hoping. Authentication is brutal though, because for every genuine candidate there are thousands of ordinary quarters, and only those with the precise alignment of errors, metal content, die markers, and strike quality even stand a chance, which means the true number of legitimate specimens may be fewer than a handful worldwide. Some experts believe only 1 or 2 examples meet the full criteria that justify the $73 million valuation, and that exclusivity is what turns interest into obsession. Picture a packed auction room, bidders holding their breath as the lot opens, numbers climbing faster than most people's annual salary, then surpassing the cost of houses, then estates, until only the wealthiest collectors remain, battling not just for a coin but for bragging rights, for history, for ownership of a mistake that became a masterpiece. And here's the part that keeps me up at night, because if this could happen once, it could happen again, and the very next coin we'll talk about carries its own shadowy story, one that begins at a different mint but the same year, and while I won't reveal its value yet, I will say this: its existence challenges everything we think we know about modern U.S. quarters. Before we get there though, think about your own life, the jars you've ignored, the boxes you've never opened, the collections passed down without explanation, because the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is often just knowledge, and now you have it. The 1973p quarter isn't just metal. It's a reminder that history leaves breadcrumbs, and those breadcrumbs sometimes lead to unimaginable wealth. And as you hold on to that thought, remember that the story doesn't end here, because if you thought this Philadelphia quarter was unbelievable, the next coin from 1973 takes the mystery to an entirely new level. And once you hear what makes it different, you'll understand why collectors whisper about it like a secret they're afraid to say out loud.